Welcome to the 1107th meeting of the Hawaiian Entomological Society. We've been having these meetings since 1905, and today we're going to honor our guest speaker, Ernie Harris, and his talk is 50 years of fruit fly research in Hawaii, because almost to the month 50 years ago, Ernie moved to Hawaii to start working on fruit flies, and he retired only a few years ago, but he's still as passionate as ever, and we still have projects going on. So we are very honored to have Ernie come and talk to us about some of his experience in doing fruit fly research and control application. Thank you very much. Come on, Ernie.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're doing business later?
Yeah.
Well, it's a joy for me to stand here in front of you guys, ladies, to share a little bit with you about fruit flies. I can remember very well what it was like when I came here. You see, I grew up on a farm in Arkansas, and I'm the oldest of 6 children, so we were the farm workers. And my father was not very thrilled about my coming to Hawaii. But I told him that, Dad, you know, I gotta find work somewhere, and Hawaii sounds like this is a good job. But what had happened is that I had gotten a master's from the University of Minnesota, and during the time that I was there from 55 to 59, let me get those numbers right there. But basically, I had gotten a master's because I did some work on Cryptorhynchus, the willow borer that attacks the base of willow trees. And while I was there, I had applied for a job with USDA ARS, and each time that an announcement would come out, I would apply, but nothing never would happen. And so I thought, well, that's probably the end of that I'd better start thinking of doing something else. So then I started to got a job teaching at the University of Arkansas in Pine Bluff. And so in 1962, I get this call from Washington about a job in Hawaii. And they said that the USDA had a project going on rhoda in the Mariana Islands, and there was complaints by the wives of the scientists involved in that work, because they had to work here in Hawaii. They had to go to Guam and spend some time there. And so one of the wives went to Mr. Steiner, who was head of the laboratory, the fruit fly lab then in Hawaii, and said to him, please don't send my husband to Guam. We got 4 children, and I can't take care of them by myself. So I guess he listened to her, so he never did assign this person to go to Guam. But my job then was to come and go to Guam and be stationed on Guam and be there to receive the fruit flies that were shipped. That was what we looked like when we arrived. And the oldest son he was, I think, about 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old, and my daughter was 2 years old. And the work going on rhoda was designed to see if the sterile insect technique would work for eradication of fruit flies. It had been successful before using against the screwworm fly. So there had been some work done in the Caribbean area in which the screwworm fly was eradicated from that island. But the biology of the screwworm fly was that when they emerged, the male and female would mate once, and then from that mating, the female would retain enough sperm to fertilize all the eggs that she would lay the rest of her life. But in case of the fruit flies, that was a continuous mating and so forth. So there was a belief that maybe the sterile insect technique wouldn't work for fruit flies. And so Dr. Nippling, who's the developer of the sterile insect technique, he was very keen on seeing if we could eradicate fruit flies from the Mariana Islands, from Rota. But at the time that the work first started involving testing of the sterile fly technique against fruit flies, they envisioned that they would use the Mariana Islands for the sterile insect technique, and that they would use the Bonin Islands for the testing of male annihilation. This is the island where Iwo Jima is located. But at the time that we started this work, they were under U.S. control. But later, these islands were given back to Japan, and Japan called them Ogasawara Islands. But over here, that shows the flight lines that were set up on that island, in which, as the plane flew around over there, you would release sterile insects. But what happened was the distance from Guam to these islands was about 3 or 4 hours flying time, and then sometimes the weather would be bad, and so what finally happened was they had to abandon trying to do male annihilation in the Ogasawara Islands, and then we concentrated on doing testing of the sterile insect technique on the island of Rota, as well as male annihilation on the island of Rota. And this is the village on Rota, and that's a plateau over there on Rota. So we had people, we had a lab on Rota, and so the support of the traps and collecting of fruit and all that was done on Rota. So the Navy did the flying for us. There was keen interest on the part of the military in whether or not an insect could be eradicated. So what happened at that time is they provided some support of the program. Then the Navy contributed by using their amphibious aircraft for transporting flies from Guam to Rota, and then also for dropping the lure. So the attractant for Oriental fruit fly was methyluginol, and we had an operation whereby we treated these blocks that were fiberboard blocks that were used for insulating buildings. We chopped up into these small pieces like that, and then saturated in methyluginol and dibrome. And so by flying over Rota and distributing those, we were able to eradicate Oriental fruit fly from Rota. So we using male annihilation against Oriental fruit fly and sterile insect releases against melon fly. So this shows the preparation necessary. We had boxes, which are over there, with wick in it. Honey was in the box, so that was to provide some food. And here we were working to fill in the boxes with pupae, and the flies would emerge inside of the box, and we would take them to Rota, and then we had release stations that were set up around strategically on the island of Rota, and the flies then would emerge and distribute themselves on Rota. The Navy, the aircraft that the Navy was using was an aircraft of that type there. It was an amphibious aircraft. So sometimes what would happen is we would load the flies on the airplane. We'd go to Rota and release the flies, and then sometimes the pilots would say, well, we need to put in a little flying time. So they would fly around over Guam and so forth to get that flying time in. Then we just sit there and ride. And then when they returned back, then we would disembark and then take our equipment back to the lab. But here is Roy Cunningham, and we had one other person. He was my first technician. He was a good man. He and I spent quite a bit of time on Saipan. This shows what it looked like over Saipan during the flying and releasing of oriental fruit flies. So what happened was, after we successfully eradicated melon fly and oriental fruit fly from Rota, we did some further work and did eradication of oriental fruit fly, melon fly from not only Saipan and Tinian, which is an island very close to Saipan. And when I started to work there, I was the first assigned to work on Guam, and then about 7 months later, Roy Cunningham joined the staff, and he was sent to Guam too. So after he arrived, I continued work on Guam for a few months longer, but then I was reassigned back to Honolulu. But when I was working on Rota, Dr. Mitchell was the person in charge at that level, and Dr. Steiner was the investigations leader. Then, while I was on Guam, on November 7th, 1962, a big typhoon hit Guam and destroyed about everything, no power or anything of that sort. So the Navy let us go to the mess hall there and get food. So that was how we were able to get food for about 3 to 4 months. But after the typhoon came, there was a lot of destruction of the island, and they had communications facilities, and when I went to send word back to headquarters about the status of the laboratory following the typhoon, there was a very long line of people there. So I said, there's no point in me getting in the line. I might as well try to do work on the lab to get it up to par so we can continue our work. So I did work on the lab, and about a week later, the line was short then. Then I came and I told Dr. Steiner that the lab was damaged, but we were able to get it back into shape well enough so we could start receiving flies and continue our work. But meanwhile, they were really panicked out about that. They thought that was the end of the project. But I told them, no, it was okay. I just didn't want to. I thought my time and effort would be better served if I just concentrated on trying to get the lab ready to continue the program, continue the experiment. So as a consequence of that, we were able to get the operation back up again, and we continued on and were successful. So we eradicated the melon fly from rhoda and the Oriental fruit fly from rhoda. And then later, after that success, we eradicated Oriental fruit fly and melon fly from tinian and saipan. We just extended that, but for the work on tinian and saipan, I had been reassigned to Honolulu, so then I had to travel back to those tinian and saipan and do TDY work to continue that work. But we were successful with that program. And then Roy Cunningham, he had come to Guam with his family, and so I went with my family from Guam to Hawaii, to Honolulu. And then then I decided, Dr. Steiner didn't object, so I decided I should be doing some ecological work as part of my assignment here on Oahu. Since Oahu is the largest urban area in the state, then I thought that knowing about ecology of the fruit flies in an urban area, this was an ideal place to do that. And so that was kind of how I slanted my research focus, was on the island of Oahu here. Since there was keen interest in the outcome of this sterile fly program against fruit flies, the top management of ARS was very much aware of who was involved in it, and so they would come out periodically to visit to see what was going on. So I had become acquainted with the top people, and so I went to Beltsville to visit. Public relations people wanted to talk to me, and so what they wanted to do, they wanted to offer me a job to meet buses of people, of citizens that would come into the research center in Beltsville, and they would give them guides, and you'd go around and you'd tell them about the different kind of research activities that were going on. So that was one job that they offered me. Then Mr. Taylor mentioned another job, and that had to do with work in North Africa. And so when he said work in North Africa, oh wow, that excited me, you know. I said, I would like to do that. He said, but you got to learn, you got to speak French. I said, oh, okay. Then I better start learning French. So immediately I embarked on learning French, and I got the book and all of that, and told my family, you know, we have a chance to go to Tunis this year, but we have to learn how to speak French. And so I bought a program and put it on my desktop machine, and we practiced doing that. And so I had, since I didn't have a PhD, I was thinking, you know, I better try to do something about that. Having a degree may not guarantee anything, but one thing for sure, if I don't have one, there are some things I won't even be considered for. So I decided I better pursue that. And so at one point, the department, ARS, they encouraged us to work on a degree. And then when we first started out, you would have to pay your own tuition and everything. Then they opened up a window of opportunity. They said, if you work on your degree like a year or so within a certain period of time, then you don't have to go on the leave or anything like that. You just do that as part of your regular duties. And so that's when I got a committee formed and so forth, and then I told them about the situation, that if I could use some of the work that I could do in North Africa as my dissertation research. Got the okay of the committee, and So I was given this assignment by Mr. Taylor, position as a leader coordinator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, North African Regional Mediterranean Fruit Fly Suppression Program, to reduce damage caused by this insect on export citrus crops, Tunis, Tunisia, Marrakesh, Morocco. That was the title they gave it. But anyway, I was able to go to Tunis and work at the research center there that the Tunisians had developed, and we provided for them radiator and training for their people. And so the training then was provided by IAEA, the International, for about 6 people from Tunisia on how to rear Mediterranean fruit fly. So that work I did then in North Africa became the title of my dissertation. When I returned to U.S., I arrived there on May 30th, 1972, and things fell into place for me, and then I was able to finish my degree in 1975. Well, since we were the pioneers in development of the sterile insect technique and doing ecological work on fruit flies, the people in Chile knew about us, and so they wrote to me, and they wanted me to come down and advise them about improving that situation in Chile. See, in Chile, it's a desert-like place. Actually, Tunisia is very much like that as well. But in Chile, there's no wild guava. Everything that grows is down in the valley, and usually water or irrigation of the plant has to come from this area where people live. So when it came to consideration for eradication of flies from a locality, you just had this to deal with. So in effect, you could eliminate them just by collecting all the fruit for a period of time so that they don't have anything to breed in. But the Chileans were very interested in, and this was a group here that I worked with. They were very good workers, and they were interested in how to make that trapping system more efficient and all of that. And I just told them, you have an easy situation to deal with, quite different from what we have in Hawaii. We were doing work on lanai. We were doing some tests on lanai to develop sterile insect technique against medfly. We wanted to be sure that the medfly we were rearing in the lab was strong enough to eradicate an outbreak in California if that happened. We did a study whereby we released sterile medflies on lanai, and we were able to get 99% suppression just from the sterile medfly releases. So that told us that the strain of medfly that we were using was strong enough to be used to eradicate any outbreak that might occur in California or otherwise. In the fall of the year, you would travel to California, Texas, and Florida to talk to the people who were doing trapping, to see what their problems are, and then provide to them information about the latest developments that we have in detection of fruit flies. So while I was in Florida, a call came in that a medfly had been found in Los Angeles. So I quickly returned to Los Angeles, and we went to the site where there was a new medfly outbreak. And I told the state people and the federal people concerned with detection that this is an ideal situation for release of the Mediterranean fruit fly. But up to that point, they had been eradicating with sprays only. And so they kind of discussed it a little bit. Then they finally decided that, okay, we'll try to see if we can eradicate this outbreak with sterile medfly releases. Since we had been geared up for mass production of medfly for Lanai, we just then continued the mass production of medfly and then shipping them to California. So as a consequence of that, we successfully eradicated medfly from the Los Angeles area of California. And that was the beginning of the use of sterile medflies for eradication of outbreaks. And then it evolved even further, so that now, I guess there's a continuous release of steriles, marked steriles in these high-risk areas. That was the outcome of, final outcome of the program that we implemented on Lanai. One point, there was interest in doing a medfly eradication on Kauai and to use Makaha to use the Waianae and as a control site. And so we did work to know what the situation was in terms of medfly in Waianae, and then what it was like in comparing the wet areas with dry areas. But what was of interest to me is that here on Oahu, you have medfly in Waianae and Makaha, and then there's coffee in those areas up in the mountainous part. Then there's coffee here in Manoa Valley, and then there's coffee over at on the other side of the island at Monowili. And so I collected coffee from these various sites. The only place where you would rear out medfly would be from Makaha and Waianae. And then I did some further work on that and found out that with the high rainfall, there's a lot of moisture inside of the fruit. And apparently when the larvae tunnel in there, they get drowned. And so that was the explanation for that. I knew that Ophius ericanus is very effective against Oriental fruit fly, and that when you go out in the field, you see them working, going from one papaya to another. And so I checked that, and then I learned that you can't rear ericanus in the laboratory. So I decided that I was going to try to rear it. So I had a talk with my technicians, and they said, well, we think we can do it. I said, okay, let's go for it then. I said, but this will be work that we are doing that we have not been assigned. And I said, but that's not going to stop me. They said, well, we support you. I said, okay, then what we will do then is we will do our work that we need to get done, and then we'll do this on the side. And so I thought about that. So what I thought that I would do would be to watch the insects. So in the field, I watched the insects, and I noticed that the parasite would always fly to the fruit and then use its antenna, kind of like that, shifting around. Then it stop, then turn around and put its ovipositor in the fruit. But where it would stop would be at a place where there's an egg in the fruit, but you couldn't see it on the surface unless you use a magnifying glass. And they were very efficient at doing that. But then when you would collect the insect, the parasite from the field, and put them in the cage, and you put the fruit inside, only males would come out of the come out of the eggs that were laid. Then I was thinking, I don't know what it is, but then I thought about, sex and how excited you can get for one female, and then if there's some guys they like 3 or 4, So I thought that was what came to my mind. Then I said, oh, maybe the approach is that we should put, instead of put cage with 1 male and 1 female, then we put 1 male and 4 females, 1 male and 8 females, 1 male and 16 females. Like, that was the idea. And so I had these various cages, and I started to do that. And then we began to get some female progeny, from these. So we continued that. And after a while, we were getting female progeny. And that was the key that led to establishment of a colony, just simply by doing that. And then pretty soon, it never was 1-to-1, but it may be like 1-to-4 or 1-to-5. But after you get enough of them, then you're okay. And that was how I came up with the way to rear Entersainus in the laboratory. Along the way there, we had applied for research to get support for that. That was this program between ARS and Israel. They had some monies there. But this was the tray. I used this tray at first just to get a handle on how the parasites would behave. And then as I said, that's when I found out that they go over the surface of the fruit with their antenna, and then they turn around and lay in it. But we had 3 different species of fruit flies in culture in the lab. So sometimes what I would do would be to puncture the fruit, then put it in a cage, and then within just a short period of time, they would lay in it. Then I could take it out to the field, put it on the tray, and I could watch what was going on to try to get some clue as to the rearing. But as I said, finally, just simply by putting males and females together there and different ratios was what really worked. And then after that, when we started to rear them, we would cut sections of papaya and put it in the cage and put holes in the fruit, and then use a brush and put the eggs in there, and that was the method we used. Then as we progressed, once we had the colony going, then we started to think about how we could really mass produce them. When we thought about mass production, Rene Bautista and Thomas Mangine, they were the ones doing the rearing, and then Rene thought about this circular cage, and that was what was created. And Thomas developed this technique of the device there for putting eggs on it. The problem was we needed a way to expose large numbers of eggs to the parasites for mass production. And so he used the syringe there to take eggs from the dish there and put them down. Then he'd use a brush to spread it all over the surface. And so as a result of that, you could put those eggs inside of a cage, and you can get production of large numbers. That was the key to really mass producing Phobis erythanus. Then we did some work in Wailua to release Phobis erythanus and Cytalia fletcheri to see if we could get results just from parasite releases. So we did have some success with that. But here we had to put in a watering system for the plots that we were going to use. And that is the planting of the zucchini. And that over there is the work of Renee and I. And So those were the results that we got from working there. We published that. Is that all? And we had a chance to do technology transfer of Ernest from our lab to Serge Giudice in Reunion Island, France. And so we shipped Ernest to Serge in parasitized pupae. Then we had a research collaboration set up about 2006. And so what we did was we used this picnic basket like to transport pupae. This is the approval for the transport, and that was a container in which parasitized pupae were contained. And this is the blue ice. So I carried about 3,000 to 4,000 of these pupae from Honolulu to Los Angeles, Paris, and then Reunion Island. And he was able to get a colony established in Reunion. And this is their research facility in Reunion Island, and this was inside the interior of Reunion. And this is inside of the lab. And these fruits were in the farmer's market area on Reunion Island. And it's been so good here. I came from Arkansas, and they were offered, well, we'll send you back to Arkansas. I said, no, that's okay. I think I earned a place here in Hawaii. I don't have to go anywhere now. Well, I do appreciate you listening to me. Unfortunately, I have only one career, and I used it up.